This is FSM.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. Nice to hear from you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night, depending on where you're listening to the programme. Coming up for 3 minutes past the hour. It is Tuesday, October 29th, 2019. I'm at the big baldy gammon, Richie Allen, with you until 7 o'clock UK time. And I've got a couple of terrific guests lined up for you this particular Tuesday. Always brilliant to be with you. Thanks for choosing this programme. It means the world to me.
Well, bring out the gimp.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
What can you say about Shaun Attwood, eh? Spent time in the US penal system. He's an author, former trader, former ecstasy dealer, YouTuber with a massive channel on YouTube. His investigative endeavours, his sleuthing into murders, unsolved murders and miscarriages of justice are absolutely brilliant. Shaun Attwood is back on the programme. Today he'll be talking about his investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, the billionaire financier who died so mysteriously a couple of months back in a New York jail. Shaun has been looking into the man, his connections, his friendships, his backers and more. Shaun Attwood joins the programme live in the second hour. Before that, my old friend Kevin Barrett returns to the programme, truthjihad.com. Kevin went to see James Fetzer's libel case with Leonard Pozner, which resulted in a jury awarding nearly $500,000 to Leonard Pozner, okay, for things that James Fetzer wrote in his book, Nobody Dies at Sandy Hook. Leonard Pozner took umbrage with the book, sued Jim, and won last week. There's a reason why I've left it till now to cover it. Kevin was there. His account of it is very, very objective. And you don't want to miss that. That comes up this hour on the Richie Allen Show, Europe's most listened to independent radio show. It's good. Well, it's good to be me today because I'm feeling a bit better. Not so struggling with the nose and the throat and the head and the testicles. No, the testicles are fine. And everything else that is ailing me. Because I'm a hypochondriac. Aren't all men hypochondriacs? Is that the plural of hypochondriac? Is it hypochondriacs? Hypochondrii. I'm a big old hypochondriac. I'm actually not that bad. Well, members of Parliament in a few hours' time might vote, and it looks like they will vote, to have an election in December. Hallelujah! 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 Yes, why hallelujah? Well, first of all, I predicted all of this. And my predictions are, well, they're not very good normally. Said we'd have an election this year before Christmas. Didn't I? 1,000 times, didn't I? And it looks like they will have one. They're debating Boris Johnson's call for a general election right now. He wants one on December 12th. Oh, I wish to God I remembered my Catholicism. What is December 12th, by the way? What is it? It's a holiday, isn't it? It's something to do with Christmas. Is it the beginning of the Advent calendar? Is it? I've turned into such a bloody Philistine. I don't know. But he wants an election on December 12th. And Labour has agreed with him. Jeremy Corbyn changed his mind on a snap election because Jeremy said, well, now that the EU has given us another extension, a flex-tension, we're prepared to vote for the general election. Johnson can only hold it with the support of MPs. However, tonight he only needs a majority of one. Yes, he doesn't need 2/3 of Parliament. He needs a majority of one. Do you want to hear him? Here's Johnson earlier today when he tabled the bill.
We are left with no choice but to go to the country to break free from this impasse and to allow us all to submit as we must in all humility to the judgment of the electorate, and to allow us to make our case, and above all, to allow a new and revitalised Parliament with a new mandate to deliver on the will of the people and get Brexit done.
Yeah. Now, it is dependent this tonight on some amendments, particularly an amendment that proposes giving 16 and 17-year-olds and EU nationals the vote. We'll come back to that. So you heard Johnson. Here's Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister has failed in his promise to be out of the European Union, do or die, on the 31st of October. But it may be that date Parliament dissolves and therefore will mark the end of his tenure in office. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever date the House decides the election will be, I'm ready for it, we're ready for it, because we want to. Yeah. We want to be able to say to the people of this country, there is an alternative to austerity, there is an alternative to inequality.
Yeah, shut up, cat weasel. Jeremy Corbyn there. And what about Lib Dem leader Joe Swinson? Here's Swinson.
I do want 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds to be...
Oh yeah, this is about the 16 and 17-year-olds, right? Yes, won't somebody please think of the children?
I do want 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds to be able to vote. I think it is a change. Its time is coming, and I will always vote to support 16 and 17-year-olds voting. And I would say to those members of the House who are sceptical, because I have debated this issue over many years with many MPs, and I would say look at the situation in Scotland. Look at the success of votes at 16 in Scotland, where you see on polling day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, young people from 5th year and 6th year leaving school, walking down the road and going en masse to the polling station, and it is a sight to behold.
It's a sight to behold! A sight to behold! When you see 15 and 16-year-olds going to the polls, yes. So what about these amendments then? Because Labour, the Labour Party, wants to amend the bill. Do you know about amendments? Because I told you about them before, so I'm not going to bore you to death with my explanation again. Okay? Labour, an amendment basically, yes, we'll vote for the bill, so long as we facilitate the vote for 16 and 17-year-olds. So they will vote for that before they vote for Johnson's bill for the election, if you understand. So Kate McCann, Sky News reporter, talks about these amendments and what they mean.
Now, there are three main Labour-backed amendments to this bill. One of them is changing the date to the 9th of December. The government has proposed the 12th. Another one is for 16 and 17-year-olds to be given the vote. And the third is for EU nationals to be allowed to vote in this general election. Now, those are controversial because the government says this is a simple bill. It should be entirely about getting that general election and doing it quickly. There should be no other issues and nothing else to consider here. It will be a decision for the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, who's up for election as the Speaker, so a difficult decision for him to make this afternoon. He will decide which of those amendments are in order. We expect that before 6 o'clock this evening we should know which of those amendments will be accepted and which might be voted on. But the problem for the government is if they are accepted, particularly the 16 and 17-year-olds and the EU nationals vote, that would be really difficult for them to go ahead with it. And for the Lib Dems and the SNP too, there's a big question now about what they do. They support it in principle, but they also want to see a general election. They don't want to see this process stopped.
Yeah, well, the government has said if the amendment, which would give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, if that passes, the government has said it will withdraw the election bill and we won't have an election in December. Here's Kate McCann with more on that and the process of changing electoral rules to let the little blighters vote, the little snowflakes.
You can debate whether or not 16-year-olds should be able to vote in general elections, but the government is saying even the Electoral Commission says a big decision on who should be able to vote should be given a 6-month consultation period. It shouldn't be taken quickly or lightly. There should be plenty of time to talk about it. And of course, this bill is going to go through the House of Commons really, really quickly in just a matter of days. Not very much time at all for MPs to make all the arguments and to consider the implications of such a big decision, which is not to say there isn't the support for it, because there certainly is in the Commons. So it's a difficult one. There is an expectation from both the government and the Labour Party side that actually those two amendments probably won't be selected. They will probably not be in order and they won't be considered, but we'll have to wait and see later on whether they are or not.
Yes, we'll wait and see. It'll be over by 8 o'clock. Now, old Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was a jihadi daddy, and a fine jihadi daddy was he. There's some breaking news about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Yeah. I know. Listen, it's the best material I could come up with in 5 minutes. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was murdered, allegedly, by a US team of superheroes on Saturday night in a bunker. And he ran away and he detonated his suicide vest. We talked about this yesterday. Well, it's just been announced this afternoon that Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have said that, wait for it, we knew Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the jihadi daddy, we knew it was him in the bunker because we stole a pair of his underpants and then we DNA tested that and determined that it was him, and then we blew up the compound.
What kind of fuckery is this?
Yeah, it's great fuckery, that, Amy. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was in this place. It was suspected he was. The Yanks, the Kurds, everybody wanted to get him. What do? We have all of this heat-seeking thermal equipment. We have binoculars that you can see around corners for 6,000 miles. We've got it all. How do we know if Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the jihadi daddy, is in the compound? Well, let's get somebody to steal a pair of his undercrackers. Steal the undercrackers, get him into lab, get him tested, lad, and then if it's him, well, just blow up the compound. Honest to God, this is what they're saying. It's 5:15. It is Tuesday, October 29th, and this is what you're supposed to believe. Yeah. We think we have Baghdadi. How do we know it's him? Let's rub his undercrackers, yellow at the front and brown at the back. That's how you'll know they're his. Get him into lab, test them, get the iodine done, get the microscope on, and we'll figure out it's him, and then we'll just kill him. But it gets better than that. Sky News is reporting all day today, as is Fox News, the sister station in the US of A, that the jihadi daddy Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was buried at sea. And that's okay, but not okay if you remember Osama bin Laden was allegedly buried at sea. Why is it not okay? Well, Sky and Fox News today, Sky and Fox both telling their audiences that this is Muslim tradition. I shit you not. But of course it isn't. Islamic tradition. The sacred texts of Islam, as we've said a million times on this program over the years, prefer people to be buried on the land. And here's a little snippet from the Quran. I quote, "So deep that its smell does not come out, and the beasts of prey do not dig it out. Land burial is preferable for devout Muslims." So the notion that they buried him at sea according to Islamic custom is a pack of porcupines. Porcupines. On the voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, John Parsons, my friend in Salford, says, Richie, a 16-year-old's brain isn't fully developed, but I guess Swinson can empathise with that, says John. Yeah, it's interesting. In some countries, the vote is presented to the boy and the girl when they turn 16. But yeah, I don't know, John. You know, I don't think it matters a bloody damn anyway, but I hear you. And finally, for the moment, it's coming up shorter monologues. I want to get into a few things with Kevin Barrett. Two things I want to get into. Everybody is furious today. Furious. And by today, I don't mean Tuesday. I mean every day. We're all furious when somebody says something that we find contemptuous, odious, annoying. There's an MEP called Chris Davies. Chris is a Liberal Democrat MEP, means member of the European Parliament. And he tweeted out about Brexiteers and that they shouldn't wear poppies. And Brexiteers shouldn't wear poppies because the European Union brought an end to centuries of conflict, said Chris Davies. So you big ignorant gammons that supported Brexit, you've no right to wear the poppy because it was the European Union that ended centuries of conflict. Now, Chris is obviously, I'm not. No, I'm going to try and bite my tongue and minimise the swearing. Chris is an arsehole, right? But can't we learn to live with arseholes? They melted down on Twitter People coming out of the woodwork to say, my parents were killed by the IRA. My brother was killed in the Falklands. He shouldn't have been in the Falklands. Right? And all the rest of it. But fair enough, fair enough. And we should be allowed to wear the poppy. Everybody goes mad. Twitter storm. Crazy times we live in. Crazy times. But it gets worse. We talk about totalitarianism. And this is no joke, and there's no pun intended here. A gig by the comedian Roy Chubby Brown has been cancelled because Swansea Council said, and I quote, it's unlikely to reflect our values and commitments.
What kind of fuckery are you?
Yes, Swansea Council cancelling Roy Chubby Brown, who has been gigging in this country in theatres large and small for 4 decades or more. He's a bit blue. He's a bit edgy. You might say he's a bit past his sell-by date now, Chubbs. You might say. But Swansea Council says no. Well, it doesn't reflect our values. My God. This was a gig booked for next April. 52 people bought tickets in advance of it when it went on sale, and it was immediately cancelled by Swansea Council, who said, doesn't reflect our values. We want all our communities and staff to feel welcome, and we felt this booking was unlikely to reflect our values and commitment to them. We recently decided that a fresh approach is essential if we are to cater for future audience needs. Yeah. The Grand Theatre in Swansea, which presumably is run by Swansea Town Council. And you might think that's nothing. You might think it's a throwaway. It's not. It's huge. Because when they get away with it, as they will, we've seen it before, theatres cancelling Gilad Atzmon, David Icke, others. It rolls on and it becomes a more common occurrence. And it happens, all of a sudden it's happening every week. A man or a woman singing or telling jokes or giving a lecture must be stopped because of our values. Because they said something that offended an LGBT person or a black person or an Irish person. And we can't have that, so we've got to cancel the gig. Wow. We'll leave it at that for the moment. 21 minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. Live on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv and multiple platforms. Here's Amy Winehouse. Yeah, this is Amy. Back in a minute. She was brilliant, eh? Amy Winehouse, she was brilliant. No two ways about it. 23 and a half minutes past the hour. I'm not going to read the newspaper in Wisconsin. I'm just going to say a very quick hello, because I want to ask him about Syria before we talk about our friend Jim Fetzer and his defamation case. My guest this hour is no stranger to you. He's been honouring me with his presence on my radio and television programmes for many years. He's a brilliant academic writer and broadcaster. Check him out at truthjihad.com. Listen to his weekly broadcast. You can read him at Veterans Today. He's a regular contributor to Press TV, of course, and many other television and radio broadcasts around the world. It's a great pleasure to welcome back to the programme my friend and yours, Dr. Kevin Barrett. Kevin, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm pretty well, Richie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, sir. Thank you for coming back. Before we talk about your presence at Jim's case, by the way, your article in Veterans Today is brilliant. And I'm so glad that you wrote it because you're objective. And I've spoken to Jim many times about this, and I do want to get Jim on, but I'd end up arguing with Jim, which is no problem. Jim and I argue, and then we part friends, and then we come back again. But I wanted to get an objective perspective on Jim's trial before getting into it with Jim. I think it's the right way to go journalistically, and I love Jim, and I know you love Jim as well. Before we talk about that, though, huge story this week, the alleged assassination of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, allegedly high up in the Islamic State Daesh organisation. A couple of things which bother me, Kevin. It's emerged today that they weren't sure that it was him. and somebody stole his underwear to do a DNA test on it, which sounds bizarre. And even more bizarre is Sky News this afternoon, which is watched by most people in the UK who get their news of an afternoon. It beats the BBC, hands down, for viewers, is saying that he was buried at sea in accordance with Islamic custom. Now that is horse shit, Kevin, isn't it? Please help me out here. As a scholar, as a student of Islam, and as a Muslim himself, I don't believe that to be true. What do you think?
Well, Karl Marx supposedly said that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. But I think it was farce the first time when they told us that bin Laden's body was thrown in the ocean according to Islamic burial custom. I still remember hearing that and not believing my ears. Are they that contemptuous of the intelligence of the world's people? There's no such Islamic burial custom. In fact, in Islam, the custom is to bury the person in the dry ground as quickly as possible. Yeah. Throwing them in the ocean is kind of the opposite of Islamic burial custom. But here now they've done it again with Baghdadi. It's as if they're rubbing our noses in the absurdity of these lies that they tell. And to make it even worse is that Trump is completely going ballistic, yammering about how Baghdadi was, hiding in a tunnel and he he met a cowardly end, and this kind of bizarre rhetoric. It's even more farcical than when they supposedly killed bin Laden, which we now know from Seymour Hersh, the greatest mainstream investigative journalist in the U.S., that never happened the way they told us. And likewise, I'm sure this didn't either.
Thanks, Kevin. And a final note on that. It's not the only similarity, of course. The ludicrous statements about bin Laden, whom we know died in late 2001, the ludicrous claim that it was Islamic custom. But doesn't this attack and alleged capture, murder, extrajudicial execution of a big terrorist, isn't it almost chapter and verse what Obama did all those years ago when he was going for re-election and he needed a boost in the polls? It's almost just the exact same story, isn't it?
Yeah, he must have just called up there's a secret federal bureau apparently called the Department of Fake Terrorism Re-Election Stunt Division. And so he just called them up and said, hey, could you do that thing you did with Obama? And they said, sure. Yeah. All the way, right up to the throwing him in the ocean as an Islamic custom. It's unbelievable.
Laughing in our faces. If you haven't checked out Kevin before, truthjihad.com, check him out. What you get there is genuinely objective journalism. And a gentleman who's not afraid from time to time to reverse himself occasionally, which is the mark of all great journalists. I used to think that, but I found some other information, and now I think this. You can't beat that. Let me read this from a newspaper in Wisconsin. This is from last week. A jury in Wisconsin has awarded $450,000 to the father of a boy killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook school shooting, after he filed a defamation lawsuit against conspiracy theorist writers who claimed the massacre never happened. A Dane County jury on Tuesday decided the amount James Fetzer must pay Leonard Pozner, whose 6-year-old son Noah was among the 26 victims in the school in Newtown on December 14th, 2012. Fetzer, a retired University of Minnesota Duluth professor now living in Wisconsin, and Palachek co-wrote the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, in which they claimed the shooting never took place but was instead an event staged by the federal government as part of an Obama administration effort to enact tighter gun restrictions. A judge earlier ruled Pozner was defamed by statements in the book that claimed he fabricated copies of his son's death certificate, and Jim was quoted as saying the damages were absurd and that he would appeal. Now, Jim's longtime collaborator and friend Kevin Barrett, who's on the line right now, you've heard Kevin already, was in the court, and this is very important, and Kevin has written an account of what happened, and it is a seriously objective account of what happened there, because Kevin is not convinced one way or the other that Jim Fetzer's characterization of what happened in Sandy Hook is true, and that's what makes Kevin's observations important. And Kevin, you make it clear that you don't know, that you're not sure one way or another what really happened at Sandy Hook, however suspicious some of the claims might be. That's very important. But you write very eloquently about the process that Jim found himself in the middle of, and you were not happy about that at all. Tell us about it.
Well, there was a 2-part trial, and the first part of the trial involved deciding whether or not Jim and Mike Palachek, and it was down to those two because Dave Gahary the main publisher of Moonrock Books, had decided that he actually believed that Lenny Pozner was telling the truth about losing his son. So Dave sort of settled and dropped out. And so then it was down to Mike and Jim. And so the first segment of the trial was about whether they had defamed Lenny Pozner in the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And specifically, the judge got it narrowed down to the statements about the birth certificate, or rather, I'm sorry, the death certificate of Lenny Pozner's son, Noah Pozner, which the original copy that had been produced years ago apparently had some differences from other copies that had floated around. Jim made much of that. Jim thought that that was actually good grounds for him to defend himself on. So the judge succeeded, perhaps with Jim's acquiescence, I think, in narrowing it down to that issue. And then the judge just made a summary judgment after refusing to let Jim bring in his document experts to say that there were serious problems with these death certificates. And the judge didn't allow Jim a jury trial on this in this first phase about whether there was actually any defamation. So the judge issued a summary judgment saying that the facts are absolutely clear that there was defamation. Jim Fetzer did defame Lenny Pozner. And so then they moved to the second phase of the trial, which is the part that I observed on the main day, which was the jury trial to set a damage award. And Pozner was asking for $1 million. The jury could have offered him anything from $0 to $1 million, and they ended up offering him or awarding him $450,000. And my problem with the whole thing was that Jim was never really allowed to present his defense, which is that he believes that his statements were truthful and therefore not libelous.
He wasn't allowed to present his defense. And you go back to the first part of the trial, which you've described, which you weren't there. It was a summary judgment issued by a judge. Jim wasn't able to explain or given the opportunity to say, well, this is why I feel that the death certificate is invalid or faked. He wasn't given ample opportunity to do that, Kevin.
No, I don't think so. I believe the biggest problem with that was that he was not allowed to bring in any expert witnesses who are expert document authenticators. But the larger problem was I don't think it ever should have been narrowed down to that, because Jim should have had a chance to show at least some of the most egregious evidence that there's something strange about Sandy Hook, and the stuff that got him led him down the rabbit hole of writing that book. And he never got to show the jury or the judge any of that. So I think that part of that was Jim's own fault, because he didn't hire an attorney for that first phase of the trial, or at least the beginning of it.
Why didn't he, Kevin? That's a really good point. Why didn't he go in there armed with at least a litigator who has experience in cases like this?
Well, for one thing, there aren't really many cases like this, if any. But I think the main reason was that he didn't think that he needed one. I think he was overconfident, and that probably won't surprise anybody who knows Jim Fetzer, that he would be overconfident. The people who don't like him would call it being pompous or arrogant, but others would just say he's very, very sure of himself, and he's not usually nasty to other people, at least not intentionally so. But yeah, he's too sure of himself, and I think that he thought it was a slam dunk case that he could easily win, when everybody else, including myself, was telling him, no, Jim, they're setting you up. You should be very, very, very careful. But he's got his own interpretation of things, and so he thought he could get away with not having an attorney. And I think he was looking for one. He was having a hard time finding one. I think part of the problem was, I think he didn't work hard enough to find one, perhaps. But I think also he was looking for one. I sent him the name of somebody I know here in Wisconsin who ended up not being able to do it. So it was some combination of him not trying hard enough, and to the extent that he did try, I don't think he found anybody. Certainly he didn't find anybody who could represent him pro bono. And Jim doesn't have that much money. I don't think they're going to squeeze $450,000 out of him.
No, of course not. These awards are usually reduced on appeal anyway. Generally, I know a little bit about litigation and defamation and libel. I know it's different in the United States. It's generally much more difficult in the US to prove defamation or libel than it is in the UK. In the UK, the onus is on the accused to prove that they didn't libel. And in the US, the onus is on the person making the claim to prove that they were libelled. Here, it favours the complainant, which is very dangerous, of course. And that's the way it is. Kevin Barrett is live on the Richie Allen Show this Tuesday. This is very important stuff here. I love Jim. I've never met him personally. I love him. I have great time for him. He's incredibly intelligent, like yourself, very smart. Not just book smart, but kind of world smart as well. But I think one of his Achilles' heels, and I'm not talking behind his back, Jim and I have had proper arguments on the radio over the years, and I love him on the one hand because he doesn't take offence and he always comes back. But on the other hand, his stubbornness leaves me wondering about him. And you said there he went into court first time, he was that convinced he would get that opportunity to demonstrate clearly why he feels as he feels, and he didn't listen. And the stubbornness was his undoing. So here's the $64 million question. I've argued with Jim about Sandy Hook, and I agree with Jim. It's one of the strangest, most bizarre things I've ever come across in my life, Kevin, at least in my life as a journalist. But I also believe Lenny Pozner. And I don't do that because I'm under any duress, because I'm under any pressure from anybody. Listen, I lost a YouTube channel. Now listen, Jim might lose $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000. That's a lot worse. But I lost a 100,000 subscriber YouTube channel for talking about Sandy Hook. Even though I was arguing with Wolfgang Halbig, it didn't matter. No room for journalism on Google. But anyway, is Jim's problem here that he is so bloody stubborn that he can't countenance the possibility that maybe some people died there? Yes, it might have been some sort of weird drill that was designed to scare people and to change the direction of the argument about gun control. But maybe people died because I look at Lenny Pozner. I tried to reach out to this man many times over the years, but I was told by a friend of the family, he'll never talk to you because you've interviewed these other guys. And I said, I have done, but I've argued with them. I've disagreed with them. But I believe Pozner is telling the truth, Kevin. And maybe Jim was too stubborn to maybe think, yeah, maybe I don't have all the facts on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I think like everybody else, Jim is subject to confirmation bias. That is, once he's made up his mind, he will sift through evidence presented to him in order to confirm what he already thinks he knows. Now, we all do that to some extent. I think Jim maybe does it. He's a little more impervious to rethinking things than he should be. And then there's the phenomenon of anchoring, where the first piece of information about an issue becomes the anchor, and then you rearrange all the evidence that comes in around that anchor. And so I guess he got that impression that this was completely staged and phony. And Jim jumps to conclusions about things being completely staged and phony quite easily. He might be right about some of these things. I don't know. For instance, he thinks that a fake Paul McCartney replaced the real Paul McCartney. That's just one example of his penchant for thinking that things are utterly and totally theatrical in ways that most of us find hard to imagine that they could be. So, yeah, I think he got much too stubbornly attached to that interpretation. And I wouldn't put it past the bad guys here of perhaps feeding him and others information designed to lead them down that very nobody died rabbit hole, which is a terrible rabbit hole to go down for the truth movement, because it puts us in a horrific position of having to look like we're unfeeling, nasty, savage brutes who don't care about the feelings of the poor survivors who lost their poor children. So I can imagine that conceivably this could have been exactly what we're told, a real school shooting by Adam Lanza, or it could have been an Operation Gladio style thing with professionals doing the shooting and Adam Lanza playing the role of the patsy. And then after the event, somebody might have photoshopped images that make it look like the school had been closed for years, or forged information giving that impression, created other kinds of tweaked evidence that would lead people to think that it was all a big stunt, as Jim thinks. And that if that was what they did, they were quite brilliant at it, because that one case, Sandy Hook, has done more to discredit the truth movement and the people who are red-pilled on a wide range of issues than anything else, because they've used it to make us look like we are really nasty people who don't care about survivors.
Yeah, they have done, haven't they? I mean, my audience is, I suppose, I don't know, I've not polled them, but just taking a cross-section of comments that I would get when I do discuss Sandy Hook, which isn't very often, the cross-section would suggest that quite the majority of my audience would think, like Jim does, that the whole thing never happened and it's all fiction, and that all of the parents we saw on television are what we've come to understand. What do we call them, Kevin? Crisis actors, I think. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and of course, when I say, listen, hang on a second, we don't know this for sure. Some of them get very vitriolic in terms of their responses. They get very angry and very kind of angst-ridden. Oh, I can't believe it, Richie. I thought you were one of us. I'm like, hang on a second, hang on. We don't know this. We know that the evidence uncovered by Wolfgang Halbig and others and Jim is compelling, that the story stinks. There's something very wrong with it. But I can't just go from the story stinks, which it does. I can't leap to the conclusion that all of the parents are liars. And I have to say yet again, I'm scared of nobody. I'm not a tough guy, but I'm not scared of anything. They already took a YouTube channel away from me, which was starting to earn some bloody money for the programme. I don't care. There's nothing else they can do to me. If I thought it was a complete hoax, I would say so. But I just don't know. I'm shocked at the decision that Jim made, and I'm shocked to hear about the circumstances he found himself in last week when he was basically prohibited, Kevin. I mean, if you want to explain that again to our audience, he wasn't given any opportunity to speak for himself and to speak to how he reached these conclusions.
When he testified during the second phase of the trial on that Tuesday, which was the day that the verdict came in late at night, he went on the stand, and at some point he said that, I guess he was questioned about his supposedly libelous statements, and he said that he didn't believe. He used the word allegedly libelous, and I think it was Pozner's attorney jumped on that, and then Jim said that he doesn't believe that it was a libel, that he thinks it was true and not libelous. And so he said that, under oath on the witness stand, and the whole courtroom sort of erupted as the judge instantly ordered the jury out of the courtroom and then gave Jim a big dressing down that the court has found that your statement was libelous and we will not allow you to impugn the integrity of the court, et cetera, et cetera.
But sorry, can I interrupt? Was the judge just following the law there? Because it had already been determined earlier in the previous phase of the trial, the first time, that, rightly or wrongly, the Jim's statement about Lenny Pozner was defamatory. So if it had already been determined, maybe the judge is following the law and saying to Jim, now is certainly not the time for you now to be, retrying the case. This is basically the punitive part of the trial. So maybe the judge was just following the law, or is it a bit more sinister? Did you see it as more sinister, like they really wanted to shut him up? Because I could also make the argument that I'm talking through my backside, which I do often, because usually before a jury gets to retire to either award damages or to determine a verdict, it's often the case that people, pre-sentencing, it's often the case that people do get to make a statement on their behalf, or at least through their lawyer. How did you see it?
Well, I agree with you. I don't think that the judge was doing anything outside the law by taking that position. But of course, it put Jim in an impossible position because he couldn't tell the truth the way he saw it. I think the real problem was that Jim wasn't allowed to properly defend himself in the first phase of the trial. But the second phase of the trial was problematic as well. The part that I saw where the Pozner side was allowed to do all sorts of things, like projecting this huge picture of Noah Pozner as the backdrop for the whole thing, which was obviously having an emotional impact on the jury. And call me sexist, but the fact that the jury was, I believe it was all women except for one guy. And women do have emotional connections with children. We all do, but perhaps a little more than men. And having this adorable, huge picture of this adorable child that Lenny lost up there, and then Lenny's saying that this guy has given me PTSD by denying that I lost my son. It was a heart-wrenching kind of soap opera, really, a drama that was designed to work on emotions. And I think in the courtroom, emotions have a subordinate place to reason and facts. And I don't think there was ever a real process to use reason and facts to get at why Jim Fetzer believed that he was telling the truth in his book.
And you also made a point in the article, and it's a very good point you make in the article. If we forget about what was said and who said it about who, we're basically down to the law determining really about hurt feelings, aren't we? It's a very strange thing. I mean, I look at libel, and the libel laws in the UK and in Ireland are important. It's important that somebody like me doesn't go on the radio and make statements about somebody that are untrue. It's hugely important that there is a process by which a person can go through to say, listen, radio presenters can't just libel me, claim that I'm a murderer or a child abuser or whatever. That's all very important. But in the case of Jim saying, I don't believe this is true, I don't believe it happened, I don't believe any of it happened, I don't believe that Lenny Pozner had a son Noah. Okay, if I was Lenny Pozner, I'd understand. I understand how Lenny Pozner would feel listening to that, if he's presented with it. There's also an argument that he could have just ignored it. But then there's the argument that, and I know Jim is not responsible for this, but the Pozner family were subject to a lot of contact from people that would be supporters of Jim and others, Wolfgang Halbig and people like that, who really got into the Sandy Hook story. And they did follow the family around and harass them and stuff like that. So I can see all of that. But ultimately the law is supposed to be blind to all of that. And when it all boils down to it, it's a case of, it's a case of it's a case of taking offence, isn't it? Or choosing to take offence, or choosing not to take offence, or getting a restraining order against a person or persons to stay away from you, or to stop chasing you around the country, or whatever it is. It's a strange one for the law to consider, is what I'm saying, Kevin. You know where I'm going, and you tackle this in the article as well. Can we make a strong enough case that if Lenny Pozner is telling the truth, that he was sufficiently hurt or sufficiently injured by Jim Fetzer's opinion that he should be awarded a financial judgment? What do you think? You know where I'm going with that?
Well, yeah, there are two questions here. One is $450,000 too much? And related to that is that PTSD claim that Fetzer was the primary factor in keeping Lenny Pozner in a state of PTSD for years and years when he otherwise would have healed. That's one issue. Is that dubious or not? And then the other issue, though, is whether Lenny Pozner would have the right to sue Jim Fetzer. Let's say that Lenny's right. Let's say Lenny did lose his son, Noah Pozner, and he's very upset that Jim and many, many others think that he didn't and say that he didn't. Does he have the right to sue for libel? Absolutely. Yes, and he should. And that's precisely what should happen. They shouldn't take down your YouTube just for mentioning the fact that there is this controversy and featuring people from different sides and arguing with them. They shouldn't censor the internet at all. Not one period or exclamation point should be taken off of the internet, much less YouTube channels and so on. But they should have a process by which the libel suit, it should have been designed to get at the truth, or to give Jim a chance to make his case. And assuming that Lenny Pozner is right, he should have been able to easily take down Jim Fetzer's case. But rather than do that, the judge, maybe it's the fault of the judge more than Lenny Pozner, but I'm sure Pozner's lawyers were just looking to win. So the whole process got shut down, and we never had a real libel trial over whether this material is libelous or whether, in fact, it's truthful and therefore not libelous. That trial never happened. And there should be that kind of libel trial. If people are making reckless defamatory statements that they should know are false, they should be sued for libel, but they shouldn't have their YouTube channels taken down, and there shouldn't be any censorship. Rather, there should be more discussion, and then the courtroom should be used to get at the truth. Yeah, but that didn't happen here.
It didn't. No, and I've looked at it objectively like you have, and it didn't. He didn't get a fair crack of the whip, Jim Fetzer, our mutual friend. He did not. And again, neither Kevin Barrett nor myself are scared of incurring the wrath of anybody. Kevin's opinion is his own, and he doesn't get swayed by anybody. Mine is very similar to Kevin's, and I don't get swayed either. I think that what happened there is very complex, very strange, very weird. I think there's a lot of there's very good reasons why Jim Fetzer and others were disturbed by what happened that day in 2012 and began looking at it. And they did uncover some very strange and bizarre circumstances, which I totally agree with. I don't know that they're right that nobody died and nothing happened. I find that hard to believe, but I remain open to being convinced. I don't disbelieve Lenny Pozner. I've been watching theatre, I've been watching television and films for all my life. If the guy is an actor, well, he's a genius. It's as simple as that. I'm not buying all of that, but it's very important to understand that Jim Fetzer wasn't treated right in that legal process and did not get an opportunity to say, well, listen, I didn't put this stuff online because I wanted to upset Lenny Pozner or anybody else. I put it online because I believe it to be true, and this is why I believe it to be true. And that's important that we understand that. Kevin Barrett is our guest. It's coming up for 9 minutes at the top of the hour. Kevin is going to stay with me for a few minutes. Kevin, you've been writing about an Iranian scientist who's detained in the United States of America, and you've been talking about him. And very few people know anything about him, and I wouldn't have known anything about him except for you. It's again a very strange case. It's again very disturbing. We talk a lot about Julian Assange, quite rightly, and what's happening to Assange in Belmarsh Prison in London. And quite rightly, we should be fighting for his right not to be extradited to a country that he's never committed a crime against. But we've also got this strange case of Dr. Soleimani. Do you want to tell us about him, Kevin? Who is he? What's he doing in the United States? And why is he being detained?
Well, Dr. Masoud Soleimani has been under arrest here in the United States for more than a year now. He was arrested last October. He was lured to the United States with an offer to head a prestigious research program at the Mayo Clinic. But at the time he was given that offer, he was already under secret indictment for supposedly smuggling material to Iran, or breaking the sanctions on Iran. And it turned out that the deal was that a couple of his graduate students had brought over some medical research material, which has no weaponization purposes or anything. It's just purely to save lives through medical research. It was a relatively small amount, just a few $1,000s worth. And he supposedly talked to them and was part of this decision to bring that back to Iran from the United States. So they're going after him for breaking the sanctions on Iran by conspiring with a couple of graduate students to bring this totally harmless, life-saving medical experimental material to Iran. So it's a trumped-up case, maybe literally as well, since the Trump administration is so hostile to Iran. And he's being held hostage, basically, to punish Iran and to pressure Iran, maybe to try to set up some kind of a prisoner swap, because Iran's holding a few Americans that maybe they want let go. I don't blame them for that, but going after this particular guy who looks like a practically saintly, totally decent, upstanding sort of guy, just to pressure the Iranian government is really not right. But it doesn't surprise me. Nothing the American government does surprises me anymore.
It's shocking, isn't it? I mean, the cheek of this administration, which basically derives its policy on the world from its Israeli masters, right? We both know this. Will be accused of anti-Semitism. Not that you could give a shit, nor could I either, to be honest with you. But has there ever been an administration more controlled by Israel, or is it just that this particular administration just doesn't try to hide it?
Well, it's a good question. Is Trump in office purely because he was selected by the Netanyahu-Likudnik wing of the Israeli power structure and his backers like Sheldon Adelson? Or is there more to the Trump presidency than that? I don't think we know for sure, but we do know that that Likudnik wing was a major factor in getting Trump elected and has had tremendous influence on him. They're the ones who ordered him to hand Jerusalem over to the Zionists. They're the ones who ordered him to declare that Israel gets to keep the Golan Heights and the West Bank and, move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, all of this stuff. So obviously the Trump administration is heavily influenced, if not owned outright, by that particular group. And they're the ones, of course, who are behind the hostility to Iran. If it was all about the U.S. national interest, the U.S. would be bending over backwards to be friendly with Iran because they're such a key geostrategic country. But because Iran has a principled anti-Zionist position, they have to be America's public enemy number one.
Yeah, it's sickening, isn't it? It sickens me all these years. I was very idealistic when I got into the independent media, Kevin. Very idealistic. I thought in a few years we'd have cracked it. We'd have reached so many people. But of course what we're seeing is the more people you reach, the more shadow banning you get, the more Google prevents your name coming up in searches. What do you make of this, Kevin? Before we get to the top of the hour, you know, Congress is looking at the power wielded by Facebook. So is UK Parliament. But that's just a smoke screen. Surely Facebook was where it was all meant to go. It was a tool dreamed up by the elites to get us all into one place, like YouTube, so that we could be easily manipulated. How wrong we were, or at least I was all those years ago when I thought, oh, the internet, they won't allow us on commercial radio. Fine, we'll do it on the internet. We'll reach whoever we want to reach, but they control that too, don't they?
Yeah, it's really too bad. And as whatever you want to say about Ed Snowden, and he's not pro 9/11 truth, which is a really bad sign. But he's right that the internet architecture needs to be totally redone to actually offer privacy, so that they can't just track everything you do and predict everything you're going to do and control you. That is Orwellian and unacceptable.
Yeah.
We really need an internet with built-in total privacy.
You know what was shocking yesterday? I was doing, when I do a monologue before I introduce my guests, it's a 20-minute monologue. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it isn't. Most of the time it isn't, even though I tried to make it funny. And one of the things I wanted to talk about yesterday was the many deaths of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Kevin, because he's died so many times, you know, in the last few years. And I went on to Google and I typed in many deaths Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Baghdadi death, 2016, 2015. I swear, even though I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic these days. Even though I'm an agnostic, nothing on Google. Nothing, Kevin. Nothing. And I know there are hundreds of pages out there in the cyber sphere of great researchers like yourself and others who have written about these things over the years, about how people seem to die many, many times and then come back to life mysteriously. You didn't get a single page about Bakr al-Baghdadi dying. It was all al-Baghdadi is dead, Baghdadi is dead, Baghdadi is dead, October 26th or whatever the bloody hell it was. And I thought, that is beyond sinister. Google is basically erasing out of existence academics like yourself and others who have written succinctly and, you know, brilliantly over the years about these issues. Just being erased, Kevin.
That's right. You know, we really need a class action suit on behalf of everybody who's being shadow banned and everybody who has any reason to think that they might be shadow banned. And we should really walk off owning Google. You know, we should be taking, every penny that outfit is worth, because that what they're doing to us is a crime.
It is a crime. Folks, go to truthjihad.com. I'm sure you know all about Kevin Barrett. Excuse me, the old throat still isn't great. Brilliant analysis of Jim's court case. Kevin, I really appreciate that. Great objectivity despite your fondness for Jim and the work you've done with him over the years. I really appreciate that. Say hi to Rabia first, of course, as usual. And thanks for your time, my friend. We'll speak again before Christmas, no doubt. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Richie. Take care.
Brilliant. The brilliant Kevin Barrett, live on the Richie Allen Show, live from Wisconsin today, Tuesday, October 29th, 2019. I need a glass of water, I do. Glynna Ishka. I need a Glynna Ishka. So stay with me, 60 seconds back with more.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Alrighty then, listen, we'll go back to Westminster in a minute and get an update there. You know, they're debating Boris Johnson's election bill this afternoon, and this evening they're looking for an election on December 12th. They are debating amendments as well. Let me just give you those amendments because they have been chosen. It is 6 o'clock right now. This is the Richie Allen Show, live in Salford and Greater Manchester. I am Richie Allen. The old voice is going to go again. I'll do my best. I'll get some water in a second. But this evening, around about 8 o'clock, Parliament should vote on choosing a general election for December 12th. They've got some amendments to get through, including one about 16 and 17-year-olds voting, which is of interest. That might scupper the whole thing, it might not. Listen, let's go back to London for headlines from FSN on your Richie Allen Show.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Benji Hire. The leader of the UK Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has said he will support a general election when it's put to a vote. A public report into a 2017 fire that killed 72 people at a British residential tower block is expected to be released on Wednesday. And US President Donald Trump says he may disclose part of the video in which Islamic State terror group leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed.
Thanks, Benji. Now, those amendments chosen by the Speaker to be debated and then voted on before the general election bill. The Jeremy Corbyn amendment, this amendment would change the date of the election from the 12th of December to the 9th of December. He'd make it on a Monday, okay? That would change the title of the bill too. You've got Oliver Dowden. He's got an amendment which would oblige the registration deadline for Scotland with the registration deadline in the is it? I can't read that. Yes, his amendment, Oliver Dowden, would align the registration deadline for Scotland with the registration deadline in the rest of the UK by removing the need for the St Andrew's Day bank holiday in Scotland to be taken into account. And the last amendment chosen by the Speaker is the Jeremy Corbyn amendment, and this is dependent on his first amendment passing. This amendment changes the writing of the bill to reflect the new title of the bill. So no amendment selected on introducing the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. That might be significant. No amendment chosen, which would tack on the right of 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the election. That's very interesting. Be right back with you in a minute. Don't forget Shaun Attwood on the Richie Allen Show in about 5 or 6 minutes' time.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Right, I'm going to take some music because I really am struggling here with the old voice. I've not had a chance to take some music, so we've got some Madonna lined up for you on the Richie Allen Show. Shaun Attwood will be talking about his investigative work, his super sleuthing into all things Jeffrey Epstein. You don't want to miss that. Shaun Attwood joins me in a few minutes. Nothing like your Richie Allen Show. Borderline by Madonna. Back shortly. My throat is drier than a nun's knickers. Drier than a nun's knickers. Jesus, it doesn't matter how much water I drink. I'm having one of those nights, yeah. It often happens towards the end of a bug. You're getting to the end of a bug, you know. Over the worst of it, you know. And then you get this kind of a relapse there. Hi to Patricia Brownschweiler. How you doing, Patricia? Asked a very good question, did Patricia, about the parents of the other children who died at Sandy Hook. Why, asks Patricia, have they not been as quick to come forward as Lenny Pozner? It's a very good question, Patricia. Now listen, as an objective observer, as somebody with no dog in the fight, and as somebody who agrees that the reporting of that story is incredibly strange, I would possibly suggest that Lenny Pozner's interview with NBC, where he talked about the fact that they were following him around. You know, he was being accosted by people in supermarkets. He was being phoned by people, emailed by people, saying that he was a liar. Maybe he got it more than anybody else. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know. I'll get it in the neck now tomorrow. I'll get the emails. They'll be coming through the website. I'm obviously some sort of CIA shill because I just won't agree with people when they tell me something without giving me incontrovertible evidence. What is there evidence of? There's evidence of some serious foul play at Sandy Hook, Connecticut. There's some very good evidence about that school's lack of being fit for purpose, or I'm not choosing my words very well here. There's a lot wrong. The first responders, the people who declared the children to be dead. It's all wrong. I agree with all of this. You've heard my interviews with Jim and with Wolfgang. I was just never comfortable, personally, with the notion that absolutely nobody died. Because I have my own eyes and my own brain. And I've seen many interviews with these parents. Yes, I saw one or two that were a bit unusual. But others appeared to me to be genuine folks trying to come to terms with the loss of their loved one. Faisal tweeted something earlier on. I retweeted it, Faisal. And I'm looking for it now because I wanted to read it out. It's on this subject. He tweets us, Faisal, considering that the court case was contrived in such a way that the facts of the case could not be objectively examined, it does favour the possibility that the authorities have something to hide, and equally probably that Jim was right, says Faisal. I'm in a bad way here. This ain't good. Hi to Marie Nick-Vreen. How you doing, Marie? Nice to hear from you. She's listening in Corkig, in Cork. There, how you? Lovely to hear from you, Marie. By the way, nice to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in this evening. Right, let me introduce my next guest. And while I introduce him, I'm going to read you from today's New York Post. Again, forgive the voice. The voice isn't great. Forgive it. Before we say hi to Shaun, let me read this. Jeffrey Epstein investigators contacted by dozens of possible victims, witnesses since his death. Victims and witnesses since his death. Investigators in the Jeffrey Epstein sex ring case have been contacted by dozens of possible victims and witnesses and are travelling the United States to cement a case against possible accomplices, according to a report. I would be very nervous if I were somebody who helped Jeffrey Epstein at this point and would be seeking legal counsel. And that's according to former US Attorney Duncan Levin, speaking to the Daily Beast. Excuse me. Two sources familiar with the investigation told the site that dozens of potential witnesses and victims have come forward just since Epstein killed himself in his Manhattan lockup in August. Let me introduce my next guest. No stranger to you whatsoever. He's built an amazing YouTube channel. I mean, we could be here all day talking about him. His work as a market trader in the US. He's dealing of ecstasy. His incarceration. Spending time in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's hellhole prisons. We talked about that. The subsequent books that he's written. Amazing best-selling books about his experiences. The talks that he gives around the world. The talks he gives in the UK. The fundraising for books, for free books for children. And he's got this brilliant YouTube channel now with an enormous following where he talks a lot about true crime, where he investigates crime, where he looks at cases that have gone cold, where he looks at cases where there appears to be a huge miscarriage of justice. We talked to him, of course, about Stephen Avery, of course, and the Making a Murder documentary series. He's an awesome guy. Let's welcome back to the programme our friend Shaun Attwood. Shaun, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Richie. This Epstein thing is just going absolutely mental on my YouTube channel right now.
Never seen nothing like it, and it's because you've earned a bit of credit with the way you've approached other stories, Shaun. You deserve it. People are going to look at your Epstein videos because you're a guy who takes a level-headed, kind of, I would say, forensic look at cases. You leave your own preconceptions at the door, and you and I know, my friend, how rare that is in today's world, even in the independent media. Question number one. Did Epstein kill himself in his jail cell in New York? I know this is speculative. It was very timely and very handy for some people. What do you make of that?
I think that is improbable. Even they polled Americans, and less than a third of them believe that is the case. He got the sweetheart deal first time around. His powerful cronies protected him, and they were able to pull the relevant strings. But once the media with it got so much momentum the second time around, he had to go. Because if it came out in a criminal court who his accomplices were, certain government agencies would have to take action. And we've seen that, on the cusp of that right now is Prince Andrew.
Talk to us about Dispatches. You've done a video on it. Look, I know my listeners know all about Shaun Attwood. You've got over 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. These videos are watched by hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, millions, but the individual videos and analysis videos are watched by hundreds of thousands of people. I don't need to sell you. Really important. You saw Dispatches. What did you think? Wasn't it kind of exciting and unusual to see a national television program talk about the Queen's son, an heir to the throne, and his relationship with Epstein? What did you make of it?
I think there was a point in time when the royal family could just pick up the phone, or someone representing them could pick up the phone and have that kind of thing shut down. But because of the internet now, the TV stations are battling the real-time news from activists and all these people all over the world. And if they don't keep up with the times, they're going to be obsolete. So that was a positive. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I couldn't believe how hard they hammered Andrew, especially specifying about the orgy that he went to with the underage girls. A lot of my videos, I've not just, gave my opinion. I've been meticulously going over the court documents. And Virginia Roberts, who most brave out of all of the victims, she's out there speaking the most at least. She said that she had sex with Andrew 3 times. And to quote her, the third time I had sex with Andy was in an orgy on Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands. I was around 18 at the time. Yeah, she was legal age, but what she saw next it was perhaps the most shocking. Epstein, Andy, approximately 8 other young girls, and I had sex together. The other girls all seemed and appeared to be under the age of 18 and didn't really speak English. Epstein laughed about the fact that they couldn't really communicate, saying that they are the easiest girls to get along with. My assumption was that Jean-Luc Brunel got the girls from East Europe. They were young and European looking and sounding. So she's basically saying that Andy was right in the mix with children having an orgy on this island.
Flown in. And we'll talk about that in a minute, flown in. In recent days, I found this extraordinary. I think you'll know about this. It might have been at the weekend. The Mail on Sunday said that some of Andrew's friends have been using very high-profile forensic analysts to suggest that photographic evidence of Andrew standing alongside Virginia and some other pictures have been doctored.
They've been saying that now for weeks, and they've also been saying that the picture of Epstein, the cadaver, is doctored as well. But I think that's all nonsense. So what I did was I went to the house that was alleged to have been taken at. I didn't think there was any way in the world I was going to get into that house. So the house is in London. It's Ghislaine Maxwell's property. Supposedly the white banister was in there that photo was taken at. So I knocked on the door. Nobody answers. Rang the bell. Nobody answers. I crossed the street, and I'm getting filmed outside the house, just talking about the history of Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. And all of a sudden the door opened. So we ran across the road. And my cameraman was on the wrong side of me, and I'm yelling. I'm talking to the person there. It was a cleaning lady. I'm telling my cameraman, get behind me, get behind me, get the banister, get the banister. And he did manage to get the banister. And I said to her, is it okay if we can come in and film? But she drew the line. She wouldn't let us actually come in and film.
Well, you did incredibly well. That's a remarkable bit of film that. You can see this, by the way, on Shaun's YouTube channel, Shaun Attwood. Just look for Shaun. I'll put a link out to it, of course, on Twitter. Just go to Shaun on Twitter, Shaun Attwood on Twitter. You'll find links to all of these videos. So that was a startling moment for you, Shaun, wasn't it? I mean, incredible moment to be there, to see that. And tell us about, remind our listeners about Ghislaine Maxwell and her part in all this. I mean, what a mysterious, again, what a web this is. Her, Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, being the daughter of the former press baron, the Mirror's Robert Maxwell. She went to ground some weeks ago, didn't she? Some months ago, but then she was followed by the press and she was picked up and filmed, I think, in the US somewhere. Is she somebody that you imagine is very, very concerned right now, like Prince Andrew? Or do you think that she's pretty nonplussed by what's happening? Maybe safe that, you know, because there are many more powerful people than her today who might have a lot to lose if this stuff comes out. How do you think she feels now, Ghislaine Maxwell? Is she worried about what's happening?
Well, she's next on the list to be suicided if she ends up in the court system, because the exact same reasons that Epstein had to go now apply to her and Jean-Luc Brunel. So in a conspiracy case like this, the government, they assign a letter to you in order of priority, of seniority in the case. So Epstein would have been A, Ghislaine Maxwell would be B, and Jean-Luc Brunel would be C. Now, if either of those other co-conspirators end up in the courtroom and the names of accomplices are made a record in the court, then that's the same liability that Epstein presented to these people. So they're next in line on the chopping board as far as I'm concerned, unless they can come up with some, you know, amazing way of making all this go away. But people are just keeping it alive online.
They're keeping it alive. This is incredible. Now, this guy is apparently in France. Remind our listeners who Jean-Luc Brunel is, because they don't often hear of him.
So Jean-Luc Brunel, he sets up a huge modeling agency in France with really high-profile models who he's claiming he launched their careers. He was also using that to procure underage girls, and Epstein boasted to Virginia Roberts that he'd slept with over 1,000 of Jean-Luc Brunel's girls. He preyed on girls coming from poor families in Eastern Europe, and he would entice them, you know, saying he's going to get them these modeling contracts, and then he would have them fast-track somehow into Epstein's network in America and on the pedophile island. And Epstein even boasted that Jean-Luc Brunel had sent him 12-year-old triplets as a birthday present. And he told Virginia Roberts he was bragging about how great the oral sex was from them.
Jesus Christ. You see, these Eastern European girls, we lived on the Costa del Sol for many years. You know this because I think we discussed it. And I was driving back from Malaga airport to through Estepona and towards the port of Duquesa years ago. And my partner, Caroline, was working in her bar there. And the weather was really bad. And I remember coming through Marbella, the weather was really bad anyway. And so I couldn't reach Caroline. And as I got around Estepona, just beyond Estepona, the weather cleared a bit. And I pulled in, dark night, took out the mobile phone and rang Caroline. Next minute there was a knock on the window, and it was a prostitute. And she was all of about 13 or 14 years old. And she was Eastern European. And it was rotten. Now, you'd see them all the time on that Costa del Sol strip from Marbella, through Estepona, through Sabanillas, Duquesa, regularly at roundabouts, very, very young girls, Eastern European. It was horrible to see. And I remember a few weeks later, we were talking to a local policeman for one reason or another. And I mentioned these girls and something needing to be done about it, because obviously they were trafficked and the passports confiscated and working under duress and all of that. And the policeman said that if I or anybody else like me tried to get involved in any sort of, you know, saviour role there, that we'd be murdered. That the people running these operations, they're way, way, way above the pay grade of the Guardia Civil in Spain or anybody else. Could you believe that? I couldn't believe it, Shaun.
Well, I interviewed John Wedger, ex-Scotland Yard detective.
Yeah. No, John, yeah.
And he said whenever he had been assigned to Vice and he came across these child victims of sex trafficking that were being pimped out as prostitutes, as he investigated it over the course of his years and learned that the customers, the clientele, were VIPs, political elites, TV celebrities, every time the order from above came to close down the investigation. And they told him, we will ruin your life if you keep this up, if you keep investigating this. You'll lose your job, lose your family, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what they did to him. They tried to ruin his life. He lost his job and everything.
So it's no surprise when you're on the Costa del Sol and the police say, listen, we can't do anything about that. We can't. So just forget about it. Don't get involved. Don't try to be a guardian angel or any of that. Don't get involved. Shaun Attwood is our guest. You know all about Shaun. World famous now. He's been on more television programmes than You've Had Hot Dinners. An extraordinary life. Incarcerated in the United States. I'm not making light of it. Your life story is amazing. Unbelievable that you're still alive, my friend. You're spending time in Arpaio's prisons. Ecstasy dealing, and was completely honest about that. The trading before that, the books, incredible. The investigative journalism now into true crimes, unsolved crimes, and into miscarriages of justice. Shaun Attwood is brilliant. I'm delighted that he's back on the programme. In one of your recent videos, in one of your updates, I think it would have been yesterday, you mentioned suicided Jean-Luc, and then you mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell. But there are people going missing already, aren't there? Or people are turning up dead. People who might have been material witnesses to what was going on. Talk to us about that.
Okay, so I've got a huge witness right now, and he is in Russia. His name is John Mark Dugan. I've interviewed him 2 or 3 times on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And he was a whistleblower who exposed racism and corruption in the Florida Police Department. So he was trusted by some colleagues as a man of integrity, but the corrupt ones were gunning for him. So he had to leave the country. He's going to get a life sentence if he goes back. They came up with all these charges for him about hacking and all this stuff. Anyway, one of the lead investigators on the Epstein case on the first time around was Joe Ricuri. Joe Ricuri, he sensed that his bosses were not looking to pursue this. They were looking to cover it up. So he gave John Mark Dugan all of his files. Now, so many years later, Joe Ricuri died mysteriously, aged just over 50, and he was perfectly healthy. It was a complete shock to his family. But then the files that were transferred over to John Mark Dugan in Russia, he showed some of those files to a friend of mine who I've worked with for years. I've done interviews with for years, Ron Chepsiuk, because he's been working on the stuff with the Cali Cartel and Pablo Escobar. And we've both written about them. Ron was out there on separate business. So people were saying to me, John Mark Dugan might be boasting that he's got these tapes, but how can this be confirmed? So Ron was out there, and Ron went to visit John Mark Dugan just because John Mark Dugan was blowing up as headlines in the news, saying that he had this information. And they did watch some of the tapes together, and they were so horrified by what they saw, they said they had to stop watching, but they did recognize some famous people in these tapes with underage girls, and these are recordings that Epstein had made as part of his blackmail operation.
And where are they now, these tapes?
So John Mark Dugan is in Russia, and he's got them encrypted somehow. I'm not a tech guy. I don't understand fully how it all works. In the last couple of weeks, the bolts were removed from his car. He was driving along.
Jesus Christ.
And he's also been poisoned as well. But he's recovered from the poisoning, and now he's agreed to do another interview. So I'm hoping to speak with him in the next couple of days.
John Mark Dugan in Russia, he's got encrypted files that show horrendous things happening to children, arranged by Epstein with some famous people in the scene, on the frame, in the film, basically.
And mainstream media is not reporting this.
They won't touch it. Wow. They won't touch it. So he'd love to give that to CNN, CNBC, Sky News, but they won't take it. Jesus wept, eh? That's where we are.
All the heads of those companies were filmed with Epstein.
And do you believe that? Is that what it comes down to? That this guy Epstein, whatever about his own perversions, that ultimately he was there to compromise people?
Yes. I mean, look at the connect with Ghislaine Maxwell. Robert Maxwell, I believe that he pilfered the Daily Mirror pension fund because he was operating on money from the Mossad and he couldn't pay them back. So he pilfered them and he ended up dead on the yacht called the Lady Ghislaine, which was named after his daughter. So you can go back decades and see the link with the intelligence agencies. People ask me, was it the CIA who took Epstein out? Was it the Mossad? I believe because it was on American soil, it was probably the CIA or, the Clintons as well. If you go back and look at the history of the Clinton body count, it's got all the hallmarks of Clinton involvement in it. And it seems to be there's some kind of war right now in America between the different political mafias, between the Trump mafia and the Clinton mafia. So perhaps both sides are using Epstein one way or the other to score points against the other.
That's really interesting, this kind of Clinton mafia against the Trump mafia. I see where you're going with that, and I'm sympathetic to that point of view. But ultimately, they would just be capo regimes, wouldn't they? The Clintons and the Trumps, ultimately, they're small fry. There's a much bigger figure in the background, in the shadows, that's controlling even them, would you say, Shaun?
Absolutely. I mean, I just watched this documentary on Netflix about the Vietnam War, and all of the presidents who came in would say, we're going to send the boys home, we're going to de-escalate the war. And as soon as they got in, no matter what they did, the war increased.
Yeah.
So it was blatantly obvious that there are much more powerful forces at work than these guys could control.
Here's the tweet from Patricia. Is it wrong to suggest that as bad as the traffickers are, and they are bad, they wouldn't have any business if it wasn't for the creeps who have a proclivity for these young girls? The sickness wouldn't continue without the low-life customers. That's a good point. And it also kind of moves on to, what is it about the very, very rich and very politically connected and their predilection for young boys and girls? We know what researchers like David, we were talking about David today, David Icke, we know what David thinks, and I'm not suggesting that he's wrong. What do you think? What is it about the very powerful and children? Is it the final taboo, or is it something even more sinister? What do you think, Shaun?
I think there's a combination of factors, and I've written and researched for years about Clinton. My new book coming out for Christmas is Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies, from the boys on the tracks to Jeffrey Epstein. So Clinton is a classic case of elite deviance. He is like a playboy character who got this power, used the power to rape women. There's multiple settlements, out-of-court settlements been made, non-disclosure agreements with Clinton, assaulting women. And after he finished his presidency, he goes on all of these journeys to be hanging out with Epstein. Now, going over the police reports from the first case against Epstein, Epstein was procuring all of these girls from Royal Palm Beach High School, and the police contacted the girls and got their testimonies, and they said, as soon as you walk in, there's pictures of all these underage girls all over the property,
Jesus
on the way
Christ.
to the massage room, and all this creepy stuff going on. And the detectives were saying anyone who had anything to do with Epstein at that point in time knew he was all about underage girls. And all these people now are saying, no way did we know any of that. But it's blatantly obvious that they did. So with Clinton, he had so much power, he he facilitated all the security for the cocaine coming in Maine, Arkansas. He played ball with the CIA, so he was rewarded the presidency. When you've got that much power, and when you've got the power of Prince Andrew, you have elite deviants, because you can do anything at all and get away with it.
Now, you say that, Shaun. Sorry to interrupt you. You say this is really, really interesting now. So you think that Andrew, however brilliant the investigators are, your own research into this is excellent, it's forensic. You think that ultimately the likes of Andrew, he's going to be protected. I mean, we talked about Jean-Marc Dugan I think you said Dugan in Russia, who's got this material evidence that would end any speculation about Epstein and the elites that he supplied children to. It's all there, but the guy can't give his videos to the media. They don't want it. So Andrew's going to be okay, isn't he? They're never going to interview him under caution.
So if it were the Queen involved in this, if she was one of the co-conspirators, she would have diplomatic immunity. Andrew's diplomatic immunity rests on the head of state of America, which is Trump. So again, we've got a power play here by Trump. He's got Andrew by the balls right now. He could say, I'm going to expand my properties in the UK, and I'm going to give you a pass in the federal court system. So there's all of these complex things going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, but hang on, isn't it naive? Shaun Attwood is our guest, by the way. It's been about a year, too long since Shaun was on this programme. You know how much I value his work and his books. He's a terrific guy. Again, forensic, objective stuff here. No dog in the fight. This is really good analysis. But I've got to pull you up on something. You're right about the photographs in Epstein's places, but Trump spent a lot of time with him. We'd be naive to think that Trump didn't know what Epstein was up to, and maybe even more naive to think that Trump didn't participate. What do you think, Shaun?
Yeah, I agree that he knew what Epstein was up to. There is even a famous quote. He acknowledged, he said, me and Epstein like beautiful women, something like that, he says, but Epstein likes them on the young side. Jesus. So it's blatantly obvious that he knew what was going on.
Listen, you'd run a million miles. If I was living next door to you and we were mates, you'd run a million miles away from me if I was hanging around with 13, 14, 15-year-old girls. And you'd be right to. You couldn't. Well, first of all, you tell the police, and you wouldn't have anything to do with me. But these guys seem to just, yeah, he likes the young girls like it's no big deal.
Well, look, when he was in jail on the first charges, and he was running that jail, he donated over $100,000 to the sheriff's department. He had his own quarters and his own legal room with his own TV. The detectives drove him out the place on his appointments and screened his visitors in plain clothes for him. While he was in that offices, he'd already been, everybody knew what he'd done. Mendelssohn from this country contacted him and asked him to broker a deal with one of the higher-ups in, I think it was J.P. Morgan. These elites do not care that you have been convicted of pedophilia and child trafficking and whatever it is. It's all about business at the end of the day to them, power and money.
And to them, there isn't anything wrong with paedophilia. It's why Prince Charles would have known, because royal protection officers would have told him that Jimmy Savile was to quote David Icke again, a record-breaking paedophile. Charles knew this, but Jimmy was all right. He was my mate. He was my best mate. So there you are. No bother.
Absolutely. And Epstein was a modern-day Jimmy Savile, procuring and trafficking these underage girls to elites.
And they were able to do it on private planes, crossing continents, with young girls, and do it for God knows how long, maybe since aeroplane travel, came about. And people look the other way. Presumably people are paid off. People at airports, they just look the other way. And these girls are basically helpless at the hands of these monsters, these lunatics. And there's a guy in Russia with evidence that would blow this wide open, and the mainstream media doesn't want to touch it. How do you feel about that? I mean, of all the things you've researched and looked into, this must make you sick, Shaun.
It does. It makes me absolutely sick because, I've got a true crime podcast now, and I interview someone for up to 2 hours a week. A lot of them are ex-prisoners, and I get their complete life stories. And behind a lot of crimes, there is a tragedy in childhood. A lot of these guys come from foster homes, and the foster homes are rife with the kids getting abused, getting pimped out. They're on drugs. They're trying to deal with trauma from childhood by taking drugs, and then they're getting pimped out. And some of these most severe crimes, one of the guys, he was raped by a man when he was a kid, and he went to prison for trying to kill that guy. And every time he got out, he went right back after him, and he went right back to prison. And I see the havoc and mayhem and destruction these kind of acts cause on people's lives, how it just ricochets right through the rest of their years while they're alive. It's really sad.
Yeah, I've had the misfortune I don't say the misfortune because I've met some lovely people, but listening to stories from people who've had to endure that, there's nothing worse than it. It needs to be told. Those stories need to be told. At the same time, you feel a bit guilty then because it's not about you, and wow, you feel a bit upset listening to it. How dare you? Because that person went through it. But it's horrendous stuff, the impact it has on people. You can follow Shaun. It's at Shaun Attwood, on Twitter. Shaun, what's your friend in Russia going to do? Again, the bombshell information from Shaun Attwood here is that there is a man in Russia who has in his possession materials that were passed to him by, correct me if I'm wrong, Shaun, by a detective that died in very strange circumstances. And on that material contains video of children being abused by Epstein and some very famous celebrities. The man has already had a couple of attempts on his life, he alleges. Well, they're not going to stop trying to kill him, Shaun. What measures is he taking to look after himself?
He's moving around a lot in Russia. He has friends with Russian special forces. And apart from that, he when I interview him, he can only say certain things. He doesn't want to. He's moving around. He doesn't. I can't be more specific. That's what.
No,
I'm saying,
I know, man. I know that. Yeah.
We don't want to give any information out that would further jeopardize his life.
And the last thing in the world you want to do, because you can't unsee it, is witness it. Not because you want to see disgusting things happening to children, because you'll never wash that out of your mind. But you need to know who's on that bloody video. I'm sure John Marcus told you who's on it, but you can't divulge that.
Okay, here's his response to that then. He said that this became headline news in the UK a few weeks ago, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, about John Mark Duggan. I'd never heard of him until then, and that's why I contacted him. And it came out in the UK because the FBI has all of those video files already, and the FBI alerted MI6. They probably alerted MI6 because some famous, powerful people in the UK were in those videos. And John Mark Duggan believes it was MI6 who leaked that to the media in this country and caused him all of a sudden to become this news headline. Because people are saying John Mark Duggan's over there bragging he's got these tapes just to make headline news, but he wasn't. He was just laying low over there, and all of a sudden this blew up because it was leaked by MI6. That's what John Mark Duggan believes. And he says that the tapes should be processed by the court system because the FBI already has them from when they raided his property in America. They came in and they cleaned everything out. Now, were they coming in to get it, to process it in court, or were they coming in to get it, to contain it, so that we would never see those tapes? That's the question.
What do you think? I know you can't.
The latter.
Do you think it's the latter?
I think the latter, yeah.
He needs to keep himself alive, doesn't he? And that information needs to be put in the public domain somehow. It really
certainly
does.
He's very brave, yeah, doing what he's doing.
He's this ex-cop, I mean, he's seen some action in Russia. And what about the Russian government? Even if it's, again, even if they've got, I don't know, cynical reasons to protect him, surely he's tried to has he been in touch with the Russian government in any way to say to them, listen, you need to protect me here, I've got this information. Has he done that?
No. He said the Russian government are very hands-off and that they're not sweating him. And the only government he's heard from in recent weeks is the US government. And they left him a voicemail asking him to come to the US embassy to surrender his passport.
Russia Today? No. They wouldn't take it and run with it. No. It's all mainstream media, isn't it? I mean, it makes me laugh. I mean, I do use some Russia Today stories because there are some decent journalists there, Polly Boyko and others, some good people there. But ultimately, it's a mainstream media organisation and they just do not want to know.
Well, they already did a documentary on him, but they've not done a follow-up since the Epstein news. And John Mark Duggan believes that the US embassy were calling in him because he probably wouldn't have left that building. They would have either tried to capture him or kill him.
Jesus wept. And of course, I mean, there will be people listening to this and they'll be incredulous. They will say, this can't be happening. Surely, you know, we are the good people in the UK and in the US. We're the good guys. We're on the side of truth and justice. We go after the bad guys around the world, Gaddafi and Saddam and Bashar al-Assad. We're the good guys. There'll be people listening to this who won't believe that an ex-cop is on the run in Russia with video footage that shows celebrities abusing children, and yet he's in danger from our governments. They won't believe it, Shaun. Educate them. Educate them, because they won't believe it, because we're the good guys, right?
Well, I think the whole Epstein story has really brought a lot of people who didn't believe these things into realizing what's actually going on in the world. Because, you know, it came about on my channel. People were asking me about it, and I did a video. I said, look, Epstein, will Epstein be suicided by Bill Clinton to cover up Lolita scandal? I posted that a week or so before he was suicided.
Yeah, that's right.
And then all the people then were like, okay, we're really starting to believe that this is the way the world works. And you mentioned Polly earlier. That's so bizarre because I was with her today from RT. She came and filmed me at a school in North London because RT are doing a documentary on the work that I'm doing now in the schools and with my podcast.
Which is brilliant. It's important work. That'd be nice to do an interview about that, because that's lovely, and not about these horrible things. And we'll do that sometime in the near future, with your permission, because that's very important work. Shaun Attwood is our guest. Yeah, you know, as for the suicide thing, weeks and weeks before he was suicided, I don't get very much right, but I did say in an interview with Tony Gosling that he'd be found hung in his cell. And that would obviously, I did say that, and the video is there to prove it. And I said, look, that of course should be very anomalous, because he should be the most protected man in the world. No protection detail wants to be humiliated by being known as the people who left somebody kill themselves as high profile as that on their watch. Totally bizarre, Shaun. And you've seen prison from outside and inside. You know all about it. It's just impossible that he would have had the means to kill himself. It's ridiculous. So here's the question. Load of people have asked it on Twitter. If you go through the tweets yourself later on, is he dead?
Yeah, I do believe that he's dead. I've watched medical examiner and medical expert videos on people said that the deformities on his face didn't match other photos, but they were comparing one side of the face to the other, and the face can contort in death, according to these medical experts. So he had to go for the aforementioned reasons. How did he go? Well, there was the assault on him that probably failed. That was a couple of weeks before the actual suiciding. And Epstein himself said that his cellmate, Nick Tartaglione, had attacked him. And to put a murderer in there, a gangster, this was an ex-cop who became a gangster and in a drug deal lured 4 guys to his brother's bar. Their bodies were found buried in his garden. This guy was a huge bodybuilder, like steroid head guy. He could have snapped Epstein's neck with his bare hands. And even though he wasn't in the cell the night Epstein was suicided, Epstein's new cellmate was conveniently moved. The guards conveniently fell asleep. Tartaglione was in the area, I know how prisoners can open other prisoners' cell doors. So as a lead suspect, an instrument, that is, not at the head of the conspiracy, but an instrument, he could have been used. There could have been some kind of quid pro quo come down with him. He had these connections in law enforcement. You get rid of Epstein, you're facing the death penalty. You'll get some play. We'll knock that down to life, and you get parole after so many years. Something like that could have easily manifested. In Arizona, you could get killed for $50 worth of heroin. They would pay an addict just to take you out. So that's how cheap life is in prison.
Yeah, and again, nobody better than you to talk about it, having spent time in one of the worst prisons in US history, of course. Shaun, thanks for sharing these insights. Of course, this is an ongoing investigation by Shaun. He's on Twitter. It's at Shaun Attwood on Twitter. He spells Shaun S-H-A-U-N because he's a Philistine. That's why. And he knows he is as well. But no, it's good. It's at Shaun Attwood. And the YouTube channel, brilliantly produced. He's done some brilliant interviews with David Icke as well. Well, he's done one, and there's a follow-up coming real soon with David and with many other people, including John Mark Duggan, central to this Epstein case as well. Shaun, I've all the time in the world for you. Tell us about the upcoming book again. Give it a big plug coming up before Christmas about the Bush, the Clintons, and the road to Epstein. Tell us about that before we go.
So it is fundamentally the stories of four people. And that is Linda Ives, the mother of one of the boys on the tracks. They're the kids that the medical expert, the coroner, said had smoked too much weed and laid side by side on the train tracks, and the train had run over them. But my research led me to discover that the state police protection for the cocaine importation by the CIA, provided by Governor Bill Clinton, the boys had either intercepted or seen something wrong that they shouldn't have seen, and they were taken out by Clinton's people in Arkansas. Then we got Ricky Ross, not the rapper. The rapper stole his name. The real Rick Ross. He was raised very poor, but became one of the biggest crack cocaine dealers in the world. He was the biggest on the West Coast, certainly out of California. He ended up in prison. And he was visited by the journalist Gary Webb, who came in and told him, hey, by the way, the cocaine you were getting was coming in through the CIA. Yeah. So Gary Webb was is the next one in there. And the other one is Kiki Camarena. So Kiki Camarena, if anyone's watched Narcos Mexico, he was the DEA agent who was poking around too much and started to go up the ladder to the elites and the CIA and the politicians that were involved, and he was kidnapped and brutally tortured, and the screams were taped. So they're the four people, but there's other stories in there as well, and there's a whole chapter on Epstein.
I look forward to it, my friend. We'll have a chat about it when it comes out. Do that. Come back on the show when it comes out. We'll have a chat about it, Shaun, because it sounds fascinating and important, because it's a strand, isn't it, of everything. It's a thread in a big web. This whole story about Epstein and paedophile rings. Thanks for your time today. Shaun's website is ShaunAttwood.com. ShaunAttwood.com. He's on Twitter at Shaun Attwood. The website will link you to the YouTube series, which is excellent, and it just gets better and better. Shaun, thanks for your time today, my friend. I know you've got talks lined up in schools later on this week. Congratulations for that work as well. It's great, and on raising money to get books to children as well. I think it's a wonderful thing you do there. So thank you, my friend, and we'll talk again real soon.
Brilliant. Really appreciate you having me on, Richie. You take care.
That's great. Thanks, Shaun. Love having you on. Shaun Attwood live on The Richie Allen Show for Tuesday, October 29th, 2019. Yeah, Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, John Mark Duggan in Russia with all of that information about celebrities abusing children, taped by Jeffrey Epstein. Thanks for your comments on that stuff tonight. I really appreciate it. To those I didn't get to, I apologise for it. The old voice is going to go any second, by the way. It'll be rested, and we'll see how it is. What I might do in the morning, I don't like doing it, is I might cry off the newspaper review. We'll see in the morning how I am. I don't feel bad, but the sore throat has been so bad over the last few days that it is kind of cracking the voice now, and I worry about that. I need to rest it when it gets like that, because if I don't, it could wipe you out for a week, and we don't want that happening. Hey, listen, I wanted to address something as well. Now, you know I'm a very thick-skinned guy. I know you know this. Very thick-skinned. You can't insult me. You can't. Because everything that could ever be said to anybody has been said to me. And at one time in my life, sadly, you know, pretty much everything that could be done to somebody was done to me. I've got very thick skin, but I wanted to address something. It was a couple of emails I had, a couple of comments made on social media. And one or two of them were made by people that have a bit of a social media presence. I missed Sunday View on Sunday just gone because I couldn't talk. And somebody put out there, he's off this morning. Doesn't he take a lot of time off? And one or two people jumped in there and went, yeah, he takes a lot of time off, that Richie Allen guy. Listen, today, Tuesday, October 29th, is live show number 225 for 2019. And we're not at the end of October. That's 225 live programs that were produced, researched, and edited by your Richie Allen. All right? So, nothing thin-skinned here. I work like a bastard. Like an absolute bastard, right? 225 shows. We've had 302 days this year. Over 1,500 shows since the Richie Allen show was imagined into life back in September of 2014. There you are. So don't be thinking. I missed 3.5 weeks in February with pneumonia, and I still managed to do 225 live programs. Maybe it's a backhanded compliment. Maybe it's because people get so attached to a program that it really pisses them off on the rare occasion when it isn't on. I can live with that. But no lack of work rate here, I tells you. So I'll have a look at it in the morning. The voice. If it is a bit scratchy, I won't do the live stream and I'll just do the radio show tomorrow, because I've got a great guest lined up tomorrow to talk about working offshore and working in oil and the devastating effects that can have on the health of the oil workers and how that's covered up. And I want to get into that on the programme tomorrow. A very important story. And much more going on as well. So I'm going to piss off now and rest the old vocal cords. Thanks for listening tonight. Thanks to Kevin Barrett for going and observing Jim Fetzer's defamation hearing, for talking to me about it. And once again, thanks to Shaun Attwood for sharing his time with us. The Epstein mystery gets more and more mysterious. The more that's uncovered, you know, it seemingly you don't get any closer to... what am I trying to say here? The more you find, the more doors you open, tend to lead to more and more and more doors and more caves. But it's very important, and thanks to Shaun Attwood for doing that. Going to finish tonight with a song from the Mavericks. Look after yourselves and one another. We'll speak again on Tuesday's programme, if not before the papers. Because we might do the papers. I don't know. We'll see. See you tomorrow.